Okay, so hi everybody. This is a video that I'm going to post on La Lima, just covering the syllabus and basically some of the basic structures of news writing, feature writing, narrative writing, and how they relate to each other. And Michelle and Cam are joining us, and very helpfully, so that this will be more of a conversation than a lecture. So okay, I guess the first thing I would say about the syllabus and the way the class works as a broad overview is in terms of there's going to be two categories of work you're going to be doing. One is the writing and the reporting, and the other is reading some examples of magazine or feature writing and kind of literary journalism and discussing them. So both a writing reporting thing every week and a reading and discussion of kind of examples of great sort of fiction sounding or fiction seeming, like journalism that reads like a novel or a short story, often. Okay, ours has strong storytelling qualities to it. Um, Regarding the reporting and writing side of the ledger here, for each week, you guys are already underway with the first assignment, right? Which is the writing the brief, or what I found is being called often filler, which I don't like the name, as I mentioned in the emails, because if I'm just asking you to write filler, like, who wants to write filler, right? But I guess that's what they're calling it, so let's use the jargon. Um, and that'll be due this Wednesday. I'm trying to give you guys time to get it all done, because I know it's probably taking a little while to get up and running with it. And I am asking you to interview at least one source for it, so there's a fair number of steps involved. But then once we do that, the rest of the writing assignments for the our summer session are going to be two feature stories. And I guess I'd make the first one, let's shoot for about 800 words for it. And the second one will say 800 to 1200 words. The first one will definitely involve just covering an event. Now, why am I going to do an event story for your first feature? Do you guys have any idea why I would do that?
Because most things happen in real time, so we have to get used to kind of covering events as they happen.
Yeah, I mean that'll definitely keep it newsy, which I think is an important part of magazine writing, which we'll get into when we talk about the structures of these different kinds of ways of writing or types of news. Um, the other part of it is that I feel like uh, it's going to simplify things. So if you go out and cover something, you can pretty much do most of the reporting. I'm not going to say every bit of it, but most of your reporting you can do, first of all, in prepping for the thing that you're going to go to cover, and secondly, just by showing up at the event as long as you have a clear plan, you should be able to do the lion's share of your reporting that day, so it's not spread out over a whole time. The other thing that makes this, now that said, you very likely will want to do follow-up calls to people you talk to. So even if it's a food truck operator and you're covering like a food truck Friday or something like that, absolutely make sure to get people's name. You need their names in order to use them in a story. You need, I don't want any, and you guys know this because you've already done reporting, I don't want any unnamed people that you're calling a source in a story. If you don't have their name, they're basically not a source. So you need their names, but you want their contact information, because when you come back, and whether you have all your notes on your phone, I'd like you guys to try and take notes on paper, right? But everything that's in your notebook or on your phone, all your notes, when you actually sit down to write it, you may be like, oh damn, I this happens more often than it doesn't, where you're like, oh, damn, I wish I knew this or I wish I knew that, but this person isn't here anymore. I'm sitting at home trying to write this stuff. So there's a good chance that you'll need to do a little bit, at least a follow-up interview after whatever it is you cover. But that said, I'd say 80 to 90% of your reporting you can do at the event. So that makes it more simple in terms of an initial writing project. The other thing that's going to make it more simple is that the other approach we could have is for me to say, okay, we'll come up with pitch me an idea. Well, for a lot of people in the class, they've never done a story. So having to develop an idea, then pitch the idea, have it be a viable idea, and then have to go chase these disparate sources that they're going to need to execute their idea makes it exponentially more complicated. You guys have both done reporting classes, so can you back up what I'm saying here? So,
I'll go
Yeah.
first.
okay.
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's harder from a time standpoint to get that mastered on your first reporting project, because if you don't understand how much time is valuable and how hard it is to track down your sources and things like that. So with this event, just being able to go and get the information right there and have all your information, like you said, 80% of it right there.
Hmm.
The first time you go, it will be a lot easier for people whose first time it is maybe doing a reporting project or something that has to do with reporting.
Yeah, and then the complexity of even developing a viable story pitch, right? This is the story I want to pursue. This is why it's a viable idea. Like I think probably did either of you guys have this experience when you were first asked to come up with a story idea and you say something like, I want to do homelessness or I want to do parking on campus. And it's like, okay, that's a huge subject. What is your story actually going to be about? Michelle, what do
Yes.
you think?
Yes. Both of those topics have been covered in um reporting in the reporting class. And I think if you can, there are definitely ways. I think there's just like, if you want to focus on specific angles about covering, okay, well, I'll just choose homelessness for one, right? I think I kind of briefly did a story about that. I tried to tie it to organizations that were uh that served as a way, as like a part of a solution to it, short term, but still somewhat. Can you guys hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah.
Sorry, I realize it's loud. Okay. Yeah, so I think I came from like with the angle of what are some organizations or nonprofits or companies out there that are trying to be a part of a solution, again, even if it's short term. So I was able to interview someone who was in charge of recruiting for Hawaii Food Bank, and what they tried to do was focus on just feeding as many people. Obviously, homeless was their top target, and then people after that, it was like, okay, families and children who maybe aren't homeless but have food scarcity or who are facing, low income, whatever it is, right? But homelessness was like their top, who they were, and then if their population wasn't homelessness that day and they just saw more of families or elderly, whoever it was, and that's okay too, right? They just
So it
want to be
gets
able to get the
much more
food out.
complicated to develop a
But
story, right?
yeah, it does. I think you just have to find a certain angle with it. Yeah, and I think so. Just to clarify, so is it better for us to pitch you the ideas we want to do and then you approve it, or how
I
you
just
know
think
how should
we've
we
got
best
5
approach
weeks,
that?
right? So just to step back a second, if you guys look, so we're on the syllabus and that's what we're covering here, right? Have I shared the screen? No, I've not. Okay, so hold on, let me step back. Okay, so, all right, here's the syllabus and here's the schedule. Well, here's the breakdown of grades, and you'll see from the breakdown of grades, basically what you can see from this is 25% of the class is going to be that discussion over literary journalism. I've put pitches, queries, and briefs as just 10% of the class, right? But then we've got 2 features. That's what this whole side of the wheel is about, right? And we've got 5 weeks. So that's basically 2 weeks per feature, because we've already used the first week for this brief assignment, okay? So if you guys have 2 weeks, the amount of time that it would take for everybody to develop a pitch, for me to vet the pitch, and then for you to pursue the pitch, the time would be very, very tight. So what I'm proposing, particularly for those of you in the class who have no reporting or writing experience, is just to cover 2 events during June and write one feature story about each event. Now, to your point, Michelle, or to your question about, does that mean you need to pitch the story to me? I think as long as you find a good event, you can go pursue the event. What I am going to caution everybody about is that you should have a very clear plan, even though it's an event and you're like, okay, I'm going to cover food trucks, or I'm going to cover a farmer's market, or I'm going to cover, the art walk on a Friday. That's not enough. You need a better plan than that. You need a clear idea of what kind of a story you're going to do when you cover the event. Now, does that mean you need to pitch it to me? No. Can you reach out to me and get, rapid feedback from me about whether that's a good plan? Absolutely. But like, if you're going to cover a food truck, when I say you want a specific angle or plan, you definitely want to make preliminary calls so that you can figure this out before the event happens. But you want to think through, what is it that I'm going to cover about this that is going to, especially with this event, that it's going to make this food truck event unique to any other week or any other food truck event that I've covered. Because otherwise, you're just going to be writing in general terms about a food truck event, and you need more focus than that, right? So maybe there's a new food truck person that's going to be there. Let's say you decide that, okay, I'm going to go to the Food Truck Friday, but I'm going to focus on this one really cool place that makes donuts or something like that. You want to then talk to them ahead of time to make sure that that's lined up and you can do it. And you're going to want to ask them right away, even before the event happens, by calling them up ahead of time. You want to say, is there something new you're doing with your donut food truck business? What's changing? How is it happening? That way you have a timeliness and you've made this story unique. Okay. So whatever it is, if it's art walk, what's new and what's different about this art walk that I can focus on that's really going to give it an angle? So covering an event is going to make this easier, but you still need to plan and have a focus for when you get there, what you're really going to do a story about. Because just doing a story that says, oh, it's the art walk, that's too vague. It's not going to work for a piece of journalism. So while I'm sharing the screen, I just scrolled from this wheel of breakdown where you can see like the briefs, which is, I'm calling that the fillers. Altogether, this is 10% of the grade. Your draft of your feature is going to be just another 10%, but your rewrite of it, it's a little hard to read this in green, but your rewrite of it is going to be another 15%. And then for your second feature, the percentages go up a bit. So your draft of the second feature, once you've had some practice at this, is going to be 12% of your grade, and the rewrite is going to be worth 18%. So the weight is definitely on the revisions. Okay, so here it's 10% for your draft, but another 15% for your revisions. And why is that? Because you guys need some feedback so that you can get better at this. Okay, and so the way that this breaks down in terms of schedule is, we've spent this first week on the brief. The second and the third week is going to be you developing your first feature. So if you notice under assignments for week 3, it says draft of your first feature due. Okay. And then revisions of your first feature are due week 4. By that time, you're already working on your second feature. And then by the end of the session, your revisions for all your written assignments, and there will be smaller writing assignments just as exercises, skills building exercises, all of your revisions will be due at the end of session. So like if you do a revision of your brief after getting feedback on it, and I'll say, do this or that, and you'll be able to bump up the grade by this much. I'm always really specific about that. I'm going to give you until the end of session to do a rewrite on your briefs, or what we're calling filler. I'm going to kind of use those two jargony terms interchangeably. So other than that, I guess the main thing I would stress while we're talking about syllabus is about turning it in. Now, I tried to make this really clear on La Lima, but again, I'm really concerned about efficiency with this class. And one thing that is really going to help me out with efficiency is, first of all, if you do all your work on a Google Doc, okay? If you hand me in a PDF, it's very difficult for me to comment on a PDF. And it's very time consuming for me to play with your PDF to be able to add comments to it. It just eats up a lot of nonsense time with dealing with a PDF when you want feedback. So the most efficient way for you guys to turn stuff in and for me to get feedback to you is for you to share, to put in the assignment drop boxes a link to a Google Doc that I can easily provide feedback on, and make sure you adjust the settings on that for editing so that I can edit it. If I get a link and it says I need to request access, that's going to delay everything, because then you have to see the email that I'm requesting access, and then you have to go in and change your settings. That delays everything. So please submit all your work with a link to a Google Doc, and make sure you've adjusted it so that I have editing access. Second point I want to make about that is to please submit everything as in one of the assignment drop boxes on La Lima. If you miss a Dropbox and you still want to get the thing in, even if it's late, just wait for me to put up the next assignment Dropbox. Why am I saying that? Because if you guys all start emailing me stuff, there's a chance I could miss your assignment submission. I mean, it's always possible because I get tons of emails every day. And if it's like an assignment submission, I don't have any way to track that. The way I track all your assignments is through La Lima, because that's where I grade them. That's where I provide the feedback and everything else. So please, even if you miss a specific assignment Dropbox, just put it in the next one. Send me an email to let me know, oh, I put this in La Lima, but put all your work, everything you need me to look at in La Lima so I can find it there. Okay. And I think that's pretty much, don't send me any PDFs. Don't send me any Pages documents. Even Microsoft Word, I mean, it's okay, but again, it's more time consuming for me to manage it in terms of giving feedback. The most efficient way is with a Google Doc. And I think, I have a section in here about, please don't use AI to write your stuff. If you want to do interesting experiments with AI as a writing tool or as a research tool, that's fine, but talk to me ahead of time before you embark on some experiment like that, so I know what you're doing. And I'm also going to say, if you do that, then you need to, at the end of the day, share that with your audience. You need to be transparent, hey, I used AI for A, B, or C for this story. Okay. Do you guys have any questions, Cam, Michelle, about the syllabus?
No.
Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions about? Let me pull up La Lima for a second. The current assignment.
I'm sorry, which assignment?
The write a magazine brief assignment. Let me
No.
pull it up here. Michelle, have you had a chance to get started on it at all? Have either of you guys?
Yes, but I kind of didn't have time to finish researching, but I wasn't really in the right setting. I was at Whole Foods looking at the different magazines, but I was also on someone else's time, so carpooling. So I
Yeah.
gotta find time to. I'll probably start tomorrow. They said Barnes and Noble. So
I
I'll
think
probably go there
so.
to check it out. But I have a general idea of like which topics I want to focus on.
Okay, I mean, and you don't find any of this confusing? I mean, you guys have a little, again, you guys have an advantage here in that you have a little bit of experience with reporting. But actually, this is new territory for both of you, because a lot of why I'm doing this is to get you guys thinking about, let's call it your target. Like, who am I going to write for? What do I need to find out about them in order to approach someone and sell a piece to them, right? Cam, have you had a chance to get rolling with this at all?
I haven't. I'm still on the reading materials and videos.
Okay, so just reach out if you guys encounter any confusion about it. But again, I just want to emphasize a lot of the part here is, let's call it, I hate using kind of commercial or businessy terms, but at the end of the day, what you guys are learning in a magazine class is a little bit of entrepreneurship, right? How do you freelance? A lot of this class is about, hey, if I want to write for magazines, I'm going to have to freelance for magazines, right? I'm probably not going to get on a staff at a magazine. Most people don't. So the question is, how do I identify which magazines I might want to sell a story to? What are the steps involved in that? And then how do I present myself to an editor? So we're just taking a baby step here where I'm saying a lot of people get in the door with a magazine brief. We're not getting to the point yet where we try to craft an email to an editor and a pitch. We're just trying to do a magazine brief on our own to see how well that works. So you guys let me know if you run into any glitches with it or any difficulty with it. Reach out to me and let me know, so that I can have we have time for me to help you sort it out before the deadline on next Wednesday, right? But it shouldn't be a long piece of writing, so you should be okay as far as that goes. Okay, so let me move on now to kind of the main event of the Zoom thing. I mean, I think I've covered everything, as far as the syllabus goes. I guess the only thing I would add is, use Grammarly, as I say here, and then in terms of this discussion stuff we're going to do, we're going to look at some of the great like journalists, like what they call the new journalists of the 60s and the 70s, because I mean, there's an argument that they were really groundbreaking in terms of the kind of magazine writing that they did in their day. But there's also some question about whether, it's like when a lot of the boomers from the 60s and 70s talk about like rock and roll or music, they act like, well, we made the greatest music that ever had been done, and nobody ever did anything better than us. We had Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the rest. And you kind of say, yeah, but there were other great things in music before you came around, and there were other great things in music after you came around, and you didn't necessarily invent any of this, right? Like with new journalism, they call it new journalism. But one of the things we'll ask after we've read some new journalism was any of this really new? Weren't writers, magazine writers, doing this a long time before the new journalists came about? And also, haven't there been a lot of cool things since? Like, I'm a Gen Xer. One of the things that happened that was really important in kind of feature writing or feature storytelling, I'll put it that way, after the baby boomers and the new journalists, was podcasting. So like this guy's name was Ira Glass. And so we'll look at podcasts as part of that whole story of like literary journalism and magazine writing. And then we'll look at some of the older writers like Hemingway or turn of the century people or the New Yorker writers of the 50s. And we're going to kind of wrap it up by looking at some of the most modern, most contemporary feature writers and where they've taken it since. So that's the deal with that. All right, let me get to now the kind of the main discussion with you guys, and that's let me see if I can switch this over. How do I, hold on. There we go. That's, you know, to talk to you guys about these different types of stories that exist in journalism, and where what we'll be doing this session fits in with it. Okay. So I shared this in week one as just a really simple illustration of the difference between a hard news story and a feature story. And any of you guys want to say which one of these is a hard, of these two stories, which one of these is a hard news story and which one's a feature? Not a tough question for you guys, right?
Definitely the top one is the hard news story, and then the feature is the one that begins with treasured memories as the headline.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, when we do this for a job, we don't get all caught up. Like, we kind of know what a feature is and we know how to write one, so we don't get all caught up in definitions of them. That really is more a question where for folks like you that are just starting in a class like this, you're like, okay, well, what's a feature story? What's a news story? Those definitions, once you start writing them and practicing them, are less important, because there's lots of different ways to define them and different ways to do them. As long as you understand certain fundamental skills about how to do them, you can start to experiment and vary in your approaches. Okay. But so that's one way of, like, without me trying to give you a dictionary definition, just look at something like this and you can clearly see right away what's a hard news story and what's a feature. It's like one of the Supreme Court justices once said about pornography, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. I would say the same is true about journalists and feature stories. It's like, I may not know how to define a feature story, but I know it when I see it. But one way we can define it is by looking at the different structures of them. You know, so that said, there are different very distinct different structures to the different kinds of journalism you can do. And I'm going to basically cover three, although there's a sort of subcategory of hard news that I'm going to touch on. Okay, so those three are, here's two of the three. There's the hard news and the feature. I would say the third structure that, you know, you want to think about in terms of how you could produce a piece of journalism is like narrative journalism. So if you ever read like a book length, you know, piece of journalism, or something that just reads purely like a story, that's just pure narrative journalism. And that would be that third type of journalism. So first type of journalism is hard news. Second type of journalism, I'm going to call that the feature. Third type of journalism, I'm going to call that narrative journalism. Okay, so now what's the difference between the three? Before I explain it, do you guys think you know? Did you guys learn this? Because different instructors will teach this in different ways. So Cam, did you learn you know, I'm thinking you're probably familiar with these hard news structures, right? Did you learn a structure for a feature story?
For the hard news, like you said, yeah, I'm very familiar with that, the inverted pyramid,
Yeah.
where you put the most important information first and then in disseminating order, because yeah. And then for the soft news, I'm not as familiar with it, but I do understand still. I think you use more of a delayed lead, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken, and you don't kind of give all the information away right away. You kind of get them with a hook, and you kind of tell the story in a different way, not so much as in an inverted way as with a hard story.
Yeah, you have a pretty good initial idea of it. And we're going to focus on this one on the right here that says, you know, soft news or feature, and it's called the kebab structure. And you're right, it does have what's, you're calling it a delayed lead. A lot of folks watching this video are not going to know what that means yet, but I'll explain it. But Michelle, are you on the same page with this?
Yes. The soft nude example, soft news examples. I'm remembering the most that well, I think I learned in 250 was we listened to a lot of examples with NPR where it wasn't hard, but they kind of started with like somebody's story and then ended with following like, you know, there's the middle part and then you ended with more information on that story.
But you took like a journalism 250 class, right? Like a basic news writing class in which you learned hard news.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
right?
definitely the inverted pyramid. And then I think it was the hourglass was another example, but I rarely saw,
That's right.
or I mostly saw inverted pyramid more than I did the hourglass one. I'm not familiar with the martini glass.
Okay, so the hourglass is another word for the martini glass, right?
Oh, okay.
All this means is that with this, I told you there were two subcategories to hard news, one being the inverted pyramid that we're seeing here, right? All this means is, for those of you guys who are trying to say, wait, what's what, and maybe you're starting to get a little confused. All this means is that for writing hard news, and I have a more detailed picture of this here, what you're trying to do is take the most important information and put it at the top of the story. So in a more detailed way, that looks like this. So you write a lead, that's like the first sentence of your article. Okay, it's different than a headline. It's just the first sentence of the article that you're writing. Okay, and that lead tells a story in itself. Now, a lot of you guys may be saying, oh, it's got to have who, what, when, where, and why in it. So let me ask you guys, because you're already a little experienced in that. Does every news lead, basic news lead for an inverted pyramid story have to have all of the who, what, when, where, and why in the lead? Tough question. What did you learn? Did you learn it well? Cam, are you smiling? Can't we? It's funny because it's like peekaboo. We can only see from your nose up. So, but I can tell you're smiling by your eyes.
Yeah, I'm definitely laughing. That's a hard one. I would have to say you're asking with the hard news, right?
Yeah, and a basic news lead, the first sentence of your article, does it have to include, like, because most of everybody watching this video is going to have heard of who, what, when, where, why. So does that
Yeah, not all the time. No, not all the time.
That's right. It does not always have to have it. What it often does is tell a story in a single sentence. And in doing so, it highlights the most interesting and important aspects of the story. And then what happens is when you write inverted pyramid, every sentence that follows gets into more detailed and often more kind of background information as you go down. So some of the biggest like background stuff about the whole context of the whole issue might be at the very bottom of the story. It's still important, but it's not the breaking news. So we put it at the bottom. Now, going back to this slide, under hard news, we have this alternative structure, which is this martini glass or hourglass approach. What this means is sometimes when you tell a story, like maybe we'll do this exercise as a group, but like, let's say I said, okay, I'm going to tell you the story of Little Red Riding Hood, right? You guys all remember that, right? Little Red Riding Hood gets the pot of butter and has to bring it to her grandmother in the village, right? It has to go through the woods where she meets the wolf, etc. And at the end, it's only at the end of the story that we get the big violent thing. I don't know if you guys know the German version, but a woodcutter hears the commotion in grandmother's house and comes bursting in. And have you guys ever heard this version? The wolf,
No.
the woodcutter takes an axe and rips open the wolf's stomach and pulls the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood out of the wolf's stomach and saves, somehow they're still alive in the wolf's stomach and saves them. Are you guys familiar with that?
Honestly, I'm not even familiar with the original Robin Hood's. I mean, Little
Red Riding Hood.
Whatever that girl.
You don't know that story, Michelle?
The Three Little Pigs one with the wolf blows the house down, but not the Robin, not the
Really?
little girl and the wolf.
Wow.
No.
Okay, well, that'll have to be for another day. But basically, think about the Three Little Pigs then. With a story like the Little Red Riding Hood or Three Little Pigs, if I said make that into a news story, what would you lead with, Cam?
You say it was a lumberjack, right?
Yeah.
Was the correct term?
Woodsman.
Lumberjack saves grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, something like that. Like I would lead with what really happened and not save it for the end.
Yeah,
the
except you
story.
wouldn't use saves as a verb tense because that would be like
Right.
a headline. But you get the idea. You'd write the lead about the violent commotion at the end with the woodsman saving Little Red Riding Hood and whatever, right? But so you'd be beginning your story here with this top part with the end of the story, actually, right? And so I was explaining what the martini glass is. And the reason I brought up Little Red Riding Hood and the Three Little Pigs is that when you're writing in the martini glass gives you an opportunity to say, if I have to write the whole Little Red Riding Hood story this way, people are going to have a really hard time following, right? Because you're trying to keep pushing up the most important information. It's going to get all jumbled up, and people are going to be like, by the end of the story, going, "Wait, what happened?" Right? So the martini glass is an alternative where you give them the lead, then you write kind of a transition here where you kind of explain. That's where, in that second paragraph of your story where you'd put in the who, what, when, where, and why, you'd really fill that out about the grandmother and the woodsman, make sure all the characters are introduced, and this happened in the village and it happened this morning. You'd make sure anything that wasn't in your lead was in that second paragraph, but then you'd pivot and you would just tell the story like you're telling the story of Little Red Riding Hood. You go back to how Little Red Riding Hood had left earlier that morning to go through the woods to, bring the grandmother a pot of butter, and that's where she ran into the wolf, et cetera, right? Or the Three Little Pigs, Michelle, you go back to the part where the wolf came up to the first house of straw, and you just tell it like you tell it in normal order, but you would lead with you would start with what would in a traditional story be the end of the story. Okay, so those are the two. This version and the martini glass are the two versions of hard news writing. In this class, we are going to be focused on feature writing. Okay, so that's this. Okay, and basically, let me just explain what this is. So people call this the Wall Street Journal formula for feature writing because it was at some point in like the 60s or the 70s that the Wall Street Journal really developed this as a formula. And I'm thinking, if you guys are just learning all this stuff at once, right, about how to write for magazines, you're learning how to target magazines, you're learning reporting, you're learning how to write like a journalist, you're learning how to deal with all these things that you're learning in the short time we're together. The best thing I can do is teach you one simple formula for how to write a feature story. And this formula will get you a really long way. You could be, for the rest of your career, writing for magazines and just use this formula and you would do fine, okay? Now, when Cam was explaining it, he kind of knew a little bit about it, and he said, oh, it's like a delayed lead. What he means by that is you begin the story with an anecdote. Just like you guys have been reading, we're already reading and discussing this week examples of feature stories. And I think if we went back and analyzed each one of them, every single one of the ones you read, I don't hold me to this because I haven't gone back and analyzed, but it looked to me like pretty much every single one you guys looked at went with this formula. And what you do is you begin with a really vivid anecdote. Now, at that beginning, we don't know what the story's about. We're just sucked in. The whole point of the opening sentences in a feature story, it has one purpose and one purpose only. Do you guys know what it is? So, Michelle, you have any idea if you're writing a feature story, what is your main objective and your only objective in those opening sentences?
hook the reader with a story about the topic you're covering?
That's right. Just hook the reader. We don't know what the hell you're talking about, but we're interested, right? And so what we're going to practice a lot, okay, because it's really, really important, is how to hook the reader, okay? Most of you guys in this class will only have had like a background in writing for English class. Not most of you, but like half of you. Or really, I want to say most of you, because even those of you that have taken a basic news writing class, most of what you learned about storytelling really came from taking English classes. And so whenever I teach feature writing to students, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, when I say, okay, write me an opening anecdote, what do you guys think I get? Given the kind of writing class background that a lot of you guys get. What do you think, Cam? What do most students, if you tell them write an opening anecdote, what do most of them end up pumping up the first time?
I feel like, sorry.
Go ahead.
I feel like most of the time students will start with like the history of the person, or like some sort of like a summary about or background on their life or something.
Yeah, like if they want to write a story about COVID, it begins like an essay for English class, right? COVID-19 was a very serious global pandemic that hit and that is not what you want to open with. When a lot of you guys have already, a few of you guys have already jumped in and started this discussion on La Lima, based on the examples that I gave you of feature stories and on the description of it. And you very aptly or astutely said, oh, feature stories, they read like you're watching a movie. They're like a movie, okay? Well, if you're in a movie, you don't start the opening of a movie with some narrator. I mean, maybe you have a couple of simple lines, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away or whatever, but you basically don't start your opening of a movie with some big explanation of the subject matter. You start it right like a movie camera. You start right in scene, right in the middle of the action. You grab the viewer by the throat and you pull them right into the story. And you've got to be a camera when you do feature writing. You've got to turn your eyes and your ears and all of your senses into like a movie camera, and then you've got to spit out film. All right, so that when we read it, it's like the beginning of a movie. And that means you have to tell a story. Okay, and so one of the reasons I want you guys to show up and participate on Zoom is so that we can practice storytelling together in real time, because you're not going to just naturally pick it up right away. It's better if we practice it with each other. And the way we'll do that is I'll tell you guys a story, and then I'll ask you guys, like now there's only two of you in there, but I'll ask you guys to pair up, and I'll say, you tell each other a story. If you can tell a story, then we'll say, okay, we don't need the whole story for this tomato, this opening, section of your feature story. We just need a bit of it, okay? And if you guys look here, you see this circle where it says opening anecdote, nut graph, details, closing anecdote. You might just open with a bit of that story. We're in the story, right? You're telling us the story, but we're not getting the whole story. We're just getting enough of it for it to grab our interest, right? And then maybe we return to that story, not all the time, but often we return to that story at the end of your feature article, okay? Now, there's this mysterious thing that's right under it that says nut graph. It's like this mushroom, right? Do either of you guys know or have a guess what the nut graph is? If the opening anecdote doesn't tell you what the story's about, but it's
The
just
nut graph tells you the story. Well, that's what the story's about.
right,
In a sense.
and why you should care.
Exactly.
Right? So what's the story about? And the so what question. So what? Why should I care? Okay. Now it's graph is short for paragraph. This is kind of newsroom lingo. But a lot of times this is proportional. So if you're doing a major feature story for Rolling Stone magazine, your opening anecdote might be fairly long. It might be actually 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs. right? It might be kind of a meaty anecdote because you're writing a long feature story. A lot of those features that you guys looked at, and that's why I didn't ask you to read the whole feature for this week, right? I just said, look at the beginnings of these stories. What do you notice about them, right? Because your opening anecdote, those are long stories. So those are long, those are big tomatoes, right? Those are long opening, I'll call them alternative leads, okay? Cam called it a delayed lead, but it's long. So your nut graph, it may not be just one paragraph. If you're writing a 5,000 word cover story for Rolling Stone magazine, your nut graph may be 2 or 3 paragraphs long of you getting into what's the story about and why do you care. Michelle, do you have any idea what it's about and why you could care could take up 2 paragraphs or more?
Covering the 5 W's there, you're giving more details, tying it back to the anecdote.
Right. I mean, what's a part of explaining to people why they should care? What kinds of things would you have to do in order to get, maybe this is tough because you guys haven't practiced this enough. Yeah. But I would say an important part of why you should care is
The timeliness,
well, there's that's really crucial. And we'll talk about
proximity.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about that in a second. But it's more, Cam, for the nut graph about the why you should care. It's more giving people the big picture, right? So, like, one of the stories was about, it's sort of a horrible story, and I was kind of hesitant to almost recommend it, but it was such a powerful one. Was about this guy who had all these wild animals in the middle of the Midwest in America, like lions and bears and all these animals that he shouldn't have had, right? In his compound. And something went wrong, and all of these animals got loose, and it was just a massacre. The law enforcement got called in and just slaughtered all of these beautiful animals because of this whole catastrophe that happened. Now, that's what the story's about. But when you're writing the nut graph for that, what do you guys think you might include in the why you should care? Here's what the story's about and why you should care.
How people can be affected, or like how could this affect, I don't know if it's certain. I'll give one example of, like, I don't know if you guys have been following the news with the National Association of Realtors. One story I was reading, like, started with a story about this couple who felt like they didn't get their negotiation commission fee when they bought their house, and then they got into the nut graph where it's like, we should care because if you bought a house from a realtor that's part of that association, then you might be affected, right? So maybe like that, you could be
Exactly.
affected, or somebody who could be affected.
Exactly. So in this case, you may offer some statistics or some information about how many people are out there in America that have like a tiger or a lion or these animals they shouldn't have, like, in their possession. How big a problem is this? And what are the downstream impacts, both to the wildlife and to the people who live around them, right? Like, is this a major issue, or was this just one isolated freak incident? You know, and I'm sure you guys can imagine it's a broader problem than that. It's not just this one guy. There are a lot of people that have animals they shouldn't have in their homes, or on their property, and it's illegal, and there are reasons it's illegal, right? And so your nut graph will include that kind of information, and then you proceed from there. Now, one of the things you guys might have noticed, I think I might put together a collection of my feature stories and share them for you guys to see kind of like who you're dealing with as an instructor and what kinds of things I did in my career when I was regularly doing journalism. Now I'm working on a book length piece of journalism that's kind of, like a long feature, like a 200-page feature. But basically, you guys heard a lot of people talking about a character arc of a person. Like, if you watch the sound clip I gave you of Eli Saslow and Lane DeGregory talking, they were talking about showing a change in a person within a story. That's pretty ambitious. And I told you guys there were 3 three categories of journalism that I was going to address, right? One is hard news, the other is feature news, the third would be narrative journalism. So the idea of really taking a character on a whole character arc, just like really in a movie where you tell a whole story like that, you may not want to do that with the kebab version. So this is showing after the nut graph, you have some more information, and then you get back to the opening anecdote. That may not show a whole character's transformation or change over the course of, the story. It may just show you kind of a snapshot of the whole situation, right? Of the whole thing you're talking about. So these meat things can vary into these could be scenes, they could be just more information, like news type of information that fills out the story, that gives us a more detailed view of what this is all about. Okay. That narrative thing, when you would be writing that, I'm not going to ask you guys to do this kind of a story because it's much more challenging. We'd need more than 5 weeks to do this. If you guys want to try it, if you feel really adventurous and you want to try narrative storytelling, then talk to me about it. That's fine. But this, what you're looking at here is something that people, sure, they use it for nonfiction storytelling. This is also a chart for novel writing and for screenwriting. And what it's showing is, like, to translate this into a screenplay, is this is your first 25 to 30 minutes of your movie. Okay, so you set up the characters, you set up a situation. Then often something really wild and unexpected happens here about 30 minutes in that throws the character into crisis. Okay, and the character wants something. And it can really vary what the character wants, but the argument that they make in narrative storytelling when they teach screenwriting this way is that if you don't have a character and you don't have something that they are willing to, like, throw everything into, or there's some dramatic purpose to them wanting it, then yeah, you may have a slice of life, but you don't have a story. In order to have a story, this person needs to have a motivation. There needs to be something they want. Now that can really vary. It may be a heist movie where they want $1 million and they want to rob a bank, or it may be a very personal story about an 8-year-old kid with an abusive father, and the kid just wants to get away. He wants to get away from his father. And that's the whole motivation of the thing. So something happens 30 minutes in that throws everything that you thought you understood about the situation for the person, and throws the person themselves into this kind of turmoil. And now they're into this, you might have heard Lane Gregory say briefly, rising and falling action. Essentially, the challenges for the character keep ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up. The person's trying to get what they want. The detective is trying to solve the murder. The robbers are trying to rob the bank, and they're succeeding a bit. And then underneath this line, there's some kind of a setback or obstacle that they now have to overcome. And it gets more and more, the tension gets more and more escalated as they get closer to solving that murder, closer to robbing that bank, or the kid has had, more and more that he can't take and is trying to figure out, oh, I'm only 8 years old, but how the hell do I get away from my father? Whatever it is, it reaches a point about 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes into the film, where you get into Act 3, where it just reaches a climax of tension. And then there's this, what they call cascading action, this whole sequence of events that just tumbles over one after the other, which you guys have seen in many movies, whether it's a romantic comedy or an action movie. It's just everything escalates to a point where in the last 20 or 30 minutes, it's all just like this cascade of action, where then we get to the end, and then there's like some kind of, it like crashes down to some resolution, and then there's some after resolution, some way that it ties up at the end. So that's narrative storytelling, very different than this or this, right? And that's just showing rising and falling action. Okay. That's kind of like the three structures of it. One of the things Cam, that you brought up that's really important has to do with news, okay? And the discussion question that I asked you guys for this week was, what's the relationship? I was basically saying, what's the relationship between this stuff on the left and this thing on the right? Right? In other words, is it okay to just write a feature story that has no timeliness, no urgency to it, no news hook? What do you guys think?
No, that wouldn't make it news. That would just make it a story, I think.
Right. Michelle, do you have a view of this?
Yeah, I agree with Cam.
Okay, so if we had some of the non-journalism majors here, they might say, I don't like writing news. I don't find it interesting. I don't want to write features. I want to write stories. I don't understand. Why does it have to have news in it? What if why can't I just tell a good story? Like, let's say my grandmother, lived through the Depression, and I want to write a feature story about my grandmother. Like, there's no timeliness there, right? My grandmother could have told the same stories she told me this year. She could have told me those same stories 10 years ago. Or let's say I want to just write a story about the Food Truck Friday, and I just want to write about Food Truck Friday. I don't want to have to tell about why this Food Truck Friday is different. What the news element of this Food Truck Friday is. What would you guys say to, as two folks who are journalism majors, what would you guys say to, another student who felt that way about
it? Well, again, I think what Cam said it best. It's a story, right? You want to incorporate something newsy about it because it could tie to a bigger issue, a topic that needs to be awareness brought to it, or it could be like what is that called, tied to your area, your location, proximity, right? It just has like some element to tie readers in to how it could affect them or not, maybe is where it could focus on trying to make it just more than just a story.
Yeah, I mean, your best stories are going to endure, right? Like, we may go back and we may read your really good feature story years from now, and it'll still be a good story. But giving it news, what do you think, Cam? Before I say my 2 cents.
I would have to say, basically, if you tell your story like that without any timeliness or proximity, then good luck getting people to want to read it, because it doesn't have any connection to them, or it doesn't have any tie to the people or to make them want to read it, because you're not telling them why this story is important to them or why it should be important to them. It's just another story.
Yeah, it gives it urgency, right? It gives it, I think what you're getting at, both of you guys got at. I mean, Michelle, you really emphasized it's going to get them to care about something bigger, right? That's something that Eli Saslow in that sound clip I had you listen to, he brings up. He's like, you're getting an intimate view into an issue or a problem that's before all of us right now. Maybe before the country, maybe before the entire world, right? And I think, Cam, the thing you're bringing up is kind of giving it an immediacy or relevancy. And just to pick up on both of you guys, it gives it an edge, right? If your feature story is newsy, it gives it like some urgency. It gives people, like, Cam, you'd said why you should care. It says, hey, this is important now. This is important to all of us now. And so you can write these other ones, but and the other thing is, if you tie it to news, it's going to help it make it unique, and it's going to give you focus. A lot of what I'm concerned about in teaching you guys right now, when you've never done a feature story, is helping you guys execute one successfully. And if I were to remove the news component, that may seem like, okay, well, that's less I have to deal with, but that's actually going to make it harder for you guys. If you forget the news part of it, it's going to make it harder because you don't have a focus. Okay. And so I guess, yeah, Michelle?
I just wanted to provide kind of like an example I thought of
Okay.
when you were like reiterating what me and Cam were saying. I feel like it's like this when you know on social media when people are like they're recording themselves and sharing like an experience, like just say for example how I got scammed or how this airline stole my money, right? They can say something like that, and someone might just scroll past that story. But if I read about it in like a magazine or a news story, I might be a little bit more interested because the news or whoever is writing that story, right? The reporter or the writer will give more context as to how it could be a better issue, or they might have gotten the interview from someone who works for that airline, another person who has had the same experience, or a bigger issue as to why that person might have experienced this issue with that airline. If I'm just seeing it on social media or their own post or whatever on YouTube, I might not care about it as much. But if there's a news story putting it out, then how could that affect me as a potential customer flying with that airline? Or maybe I decide not to fly with that airline after reading. So I think they provide more information and can tie together a bigger piece or a bigger issue to in the story. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I don't want this to go on and on. You guys have been great about sticking with me here, but I know both for anyone who wants to watch the video and for you guys, because I'm sure it's summertime and you have busy schedules, we should probably cut it short in a minute. In a minute, but let me just finish kind of with this. A couple points. One, a little bit of housekeeping, just how we go from here to the next assignment for next week. And two, to pick up on something that Cam said about the different things that make something news. Because we keep saying, oh, it has to have news. Well, Michelle and Cam have both had journalism classes, so they've learned what makes something newsworthy. Those of you who've never had any journalism classes haven't had that. So I will actually focus in the next session on how to write news, because it's so important to how to write features for all the reasons we've been talking about for the last few minutes. So let me do two things to finish up. One, let me show you guys the elements that make something news really quick. And the other thing, which you guys already know, but we can walk through it together for everyone else. And the other thing is to just point you guys to what I'm going to put up for week 2 that'll get you started on how to find an event to cover for your first feature story. So let me start with what's newsworthy, and then I'm going to share some links with you guys right now. If you want them, I can shoot you to an email, and I'll post all of this for everybody on La Lima for just so people don't get a confusing email. I'll post it all on La Lima for week 2 of our class. But let me start with what's newsworthy, and then I'll deal with how to get into the event coverage. So for what's newsworthy, can you guys name the 5 drivers? Here's another quick test. So one thing I want to do, and it's going to be optional, by the way, is I'm going to let you guys take, are you guys interested in doing this? My exam on how to write a basic news lead, to just see, how you're doing. How well do you know how your basic news writing? And I figured I would offer that to everybody who wants to take it. Those who've never had a news writing class can just blow it off and just say, hey, I've never done any news writing, so there's no point me trying to take this exam. The rest of you guys, like you two, can take it to just see how you do on this by my lights, and see how much work we need to do on it. And if you do really well, let's say half the class takes the optional exam because you've already had news classes, and most of you guys, most of the half of you that have done this do really well, I'll then tailor the work knowing that you guys don't need all the, you can do more ambitious things if you know your news writing, right? But let's start. This will be a quick quiz. So Michelle and Cam, you guys ready for quiz here? What are the 6 news drivers that make something news?
Proximity.
Yeah.
Timeliness.
Okay, and what do we know about proximity and timeliness in regard to all these other ones? So we're going to name 4 others. They're in every story, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, sometimes maybe we'll have a story about China or something, but proximity means, did it happen here? Right? So like if a fatal accident happens in, I don't know, Idaho right now or an hour from now, it's not news to us because there's lots of fatalities. But if a fatality happens on University Avenue right outside of UH Manoa or on King Street, that's news, right? Because it's close to home. Okay. And timeliness is self-explanatory, right? What makes the story a story now? And part of this is breaking news. Okay, so the most urgent, most updated information is going to be the most timely, right? If there's a shooting that happens, the moments when this is happening and the police are in chase or something like that are, the more timely it is, the more newsy it is, right? And so you want to make your stuff as current and updated as possible. And journalists post that stuff as fast as they can because it's breaking news while it's happening. So they're in a rush to get the news out because that's when it's the most newsy, right? Now, if you guys are covering Food Truck Friday, you still need to think about your timeliness. What makes this Food Truck Friday unique and timely? Is there a larger group of food trucks there? Are they doing it in a new place where they've never done it before? Is there one new food truck there that's really great? Are they changing the way they organize it in some way? What is it that is new and different about this event that distinguishes it? If you don't have that, you haven't found your angle for an event. You need at least, you're going to have proximity with anything you cover for an event with this story. But you've got to figure out your timeliness. What makes this particular event on this, if you're doing the swap meet at Aloha Stadium, what's different this week than that would be different from any other week? You've got to figure that out. And ideally, one way you figure that out is you make some calls to people ahead of time. Okay, so if you're doing a swap meet, try and figure out who the organizers are or who might be having some of the stands that are up, the vendors that'll be there, and asking them, what's going to be unique about this swap meet? What's changing? What's happening with the whole scene over there that I maybe would focus on for my coverage? Okay. All right. Now, what else, you guys? What are the other ones?
Human interest and uniqueness.
What?
Human interest is one, and uniqueness.
Uniqueness.
Right?
Let's go with human interest. I don't
or
always
unusualness.
Unusualness, right? And what is this? Did you guys learn the expression that has to do with a dog with this story? You guys know what I'm talking about? How many of you guys have heard of this?
The smiling dog?
No? You guys ever heard of that? We'll say the man bites dog story. Okay.
Oh yeah. Instead of the dog biting the man bites the dog, which makes the story unusual, which makes it news.
Right.
Newsy.
If a dog bites a man, it's not news. If a man bites a dog, okay, that's a bit weird. That might be a news story. Okay. So man bites dog stories. Okay. Now, one thing that I challenge my students with is I give them a study, like the results of a study, and I say, what's your lead going to be? What's your news going to be from this study, the results of this study? And guess what? 9 times out of 10, even though it's just a research study, like let's say a study on marriages or a study on homelessness or whatever, you're actually looking for the man bites dog element. Do you guys have any idea why I'm saying that? I've stumped you because you never had me in basic news, right?
Say it again. Ask the question again.
Let's say I give you a results of a study and I say, write a news story about this, right? It's actually what you're looking for is unusualness. Why would that be with a study?
Could explain like why there's an anomaly of some sorts within that study, or like show a rarity or something like that. Why it sets it, what the change is. It explains like a change or something, different results.
Different results, I think you're starting to get at. Cameron, are you stumped? That's okay. Sometimes
I think no. I think because with numbers, it's important that you find the anomaly, because if not, then you're just listing a bunch of numbers basically. Like you have to tell me why these numbers matter, which is why you have to find the unusualness in the numbers.
Okay, well, let me give you an example. What would be more interesting to you if I told you basically there's results of a marriage study and a lot of people get divorced after they get married, like say 40% get divorced, right? But the story also shows that, or the study also shows that people who live together before they get married are actually more likely to divorce than people who never live together before they get married. What would be a better lead?
The latter.
Right, because we didn't expect that, did we? You called it an anomaly, but it's more like, wow, they did this study and here's something I didn't know or I didn't expect about marriages or about, say, homelessness. If I did a result of a homeless story, I said, it turns out a lot of homeless people are either crazy or drug addicts, right? We go, okay, well, I guess I kind of thought that. But if I said, actually, we did a study, we found out most homeless people are quite normal, healthy people that just ran into a lot of debt and are down on their luck, or they lost a job unexpectedly. That would be a stronger story, right? So the only thing the only reason I went down that whole rabbit hole was I wanted to emphasize that when we say unusualness, that can take a lot of different forms. And a lot of what it means to grow and develop and learn as a journalist is to learn how to think like a journalist and learn how to see a story. And part of that is like learning how to recognize when something is unusual in a way that makes it news. Does that make sense to you guys? So, and that's why the example of a study is because you wouldn't expect that when you think of, when I think of like unusualness, I always think of this story that I read once about a drunk guy who climbed into the panda cage of the panda area of the zoo at the Beijing Zoo and picked a fight with a panda bear, which is a dumb thing to do, and you would only do if you were drunk, right? But that's unusual, right? So most unusual stories are something
Drunk
weird.
stories, yes.
What?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, drunk stories, yes.
Right. Yeah. So like, I mean, that's an unusual, that's wacky, that's weird. Most of the time when we think unusualness, we think of weird stuff like that. We don't think of like, oh, a study with unexpected results. But unusualness can mean a lot of different things. You have to have a nose for it. Okay, so what are the other ones? You want me to just do it or you guys know it? You want me to just write them out or you guys know it?
Human interest, change, and importance. Importance is one.
Well, not on the list I teach, but Michelle, you've never had us, different journalism professors, teach this different ways. So human interest, I would kind of agree, but it's not on my short list because it's too vague, I guess. It's a valid one, but it's not on my list of 6. Cam, you've had classes at UH, so do you remember what they are?
Nah, you can take it. You can take it
Okay,
from
let me
here.
take it. Yeah, I'm killing y'all. All right. So impact, if it affects people, right? Okay, so like if construction workers hit a water main and it makes the water undrinkable in Honolulu for the next 3 days, that's an impact story, right? If we're going to be hit with, you guys remember the storm last week? You know, there were impact stories about the storm, the flooding, the loss of electricity. This rolling blackout stuff has been a big impact story for us recently, right? If taxes go up locally or in, nationally, that can be a story, et cetera, right? Impact, conflict, right? When, individuals or groups clash, that draws attention in the same way that, like, if you're at a bar and a fight breaks out, everybody's head snaps over to look at the fight. That makes it news. So when individuals or groups clash, it's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last one out of the 6 is, let's call it celebrity. We always call it prominence, but I think celebrity is maybe an easier thing. If it's a well-known public figure, the fact that the person is well-known, it drives news in and of itself. So, like, for example, if I break my leg, it's not news. But if Barack Obama breaks his leg, it's news, right? Even though he's no longer president. So, okay. And do you guys remember the final take-home lesson about these, let's call these news drivers? So 2 take-home lessons about these, okay? I'm going to say, I'm just going to bullet point these. 2 take-home lessons. 1, the more of these you can find in a given thing that you're covering. So let's say it happened nearby, there's a timeliness element. Let's say a bunch of guys in, this is a stupid example, but so let's say a bunch of guys in clown suits break into a whole bunch of cars on campus, and surveillance cameras have images of these guys in clown suits breaking into people's cars. Okay. And one of the cars that they break into is like Lasner, like the president of UH's car. Okay. Well, now we've got proximity. It happened right near us because it happened on campus. Timeliness. It happened last night. Unusualness, because it's a bunch of thieves in clown suits. Impact, because it puts all of our cars at risk when we're parking on campus. It raises a real security concern. Celebrity, because they broke into the president of the university's car. And maybe there's some conflict too, because people are really pissed off about it, or they caught someone they think is a clown and the guy's saying he's falsely accused or whatever else, right? So the more of these things that you would have in a given story, the bigger the story would be, right? And then the final, so that's the first thing I would say. So 2 final takeaways. Takeaways. 1, the more of these elements you find in a given story, for a given story, the bigger the news value, generally, right? And second of all, the reason why I'm showing you, the whole point here, the whole reason I'm showing you this is whatever you cover, okay, whatever, let's say you just do 1 interview, or let's say you've just spent the whole day at the Food Truck Friday or whatever it is you're covering, right? Whether it's 1 interview or that whole day of coverage, you want to look at your notes and you want to read it for these news values. And also, when you go out to do the reporting, you want to seek these news values. So you want to find the timeliness, you want to find the unusualness, you want to find the impact, the conflict, if there's some famous person there. And you want to be, we have you practice this stuff in these classes because the more times you do it, the better you get at picking it up when you see it. Does that make sense to you guys? You want to scan the landscape, looking for these values, let's say for your reporting. You want to scan the landscape for these news elements, news drivers. Consider them every time you do an interview. And then comb through your notes for these elements. Okay. Did that help you guys? Is this all, was this new to you guys, or are you guys like, oh yeah, I remember learning this now?
A good brush up.
A little bit of
Great refresher, definitely.
Yeah. Where did you study basic journalism? Michelle, did you do your basic news writing class at UH?
No.
And did they cover
Mainland.
did they cover it similarly as I just did?
Yes. Yes.
They did. Okay. Well, that's good, right? So that means we're all on the same page. So, okay. And I think the final point I was going to make was, if I can pull it up. So I am, for you guys now, I'm going to send you an email with these links, but I'm going to put them in week 2 by Sunday or Monday. Okay. So these are all, this is the Star Advertisers event calendar. This is Hawaii Magazine's event calendar. This is like this, it's kind of cheesy, Go Hawaii for tourists, but it does have a bunch of events. These are exhibits like at the Honolulu Museum of Art. These are more exhibits at the Bishop. Here's a website for farmers markets. Here's UH news. So this is really helpful for finding events on campus and news stories to cover on campus that you can definitely turn into a feature. What you would do is you would go to, where is it? By campus, Manoa. And here are all these stories. So like you could do a feature on the Halealoha Towers renovation. Oh, look, this would be a cool feature on look at this. UH astronomers uncover array of strange exoplanet worlds, right? That's a really good feature. And if you want to cover something like that, that's at least that's pretty straightforward. It wouldn't be that hard to do. So, okay, it looks like I don't know, Cam got disconnected. But anyway, we're at the end here. So let me email you, Michelle, and I'll email Cam these links. And for everybody else, I will put this up on La Lima for week 2. And Cam, can you think of anything to say in closing out? I mean, Michelle?
No, not at the moment. Just I'll definitely be in touch with like what is it called, event ideas.
Okay, cool. All right, everybody. I hope this was helpful and informative. I know it went on a while, but I hope that it was at least packed with enough useful information that you got a lot out of it. And I'm going to post this for week 1 on YouTube. I mean, on La Lima. Thank you, Michelle. Can you show your face, your pretty face, one last time for us to say goodbye? Bye. All right. I don't know why we lost Cam. I think that was accidental. But anyway, you think you'll make it next week? Okay, you're on mute, but I think that was a yes. Try and
Oh,
make
yes.
this because could you imagine me trying to cover this material talking to myself? I think I would go insane.
It would have, I mean, well, up to you.
What?
Up to you.
Yeah, well,
I
I'm not
mean,
that good at talking to myself. Could you do it? Could you lecture about all this by yourself, but with a camera on?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, some people are great at that on social media of like blah 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 into their phone, but not me, man. All right. Sayonara. See you next week. Aloha.
See you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.